there is no downside in looking at ZAP. There's a lot of downside in not looking at ZAP. At the very least, take an hour, get a demo, your world is going to change. There was absolutely no downside about bringing a tool in-house and working with it to understand what's going on in the industry and generate some ideas and be able to talk intelligently about it. Because it's only a matter of time before management comes to you and say, what are you doing about? Better have an answer.
Hey, welcome everyone to another episode of Zap Talk. Great to have everyone back. And as always, we're joined by the one and only Alex Zapp. Hey, Alex.
Hey, guys. Great to see you all. Amazing. The best people in the room today.
And speaking of amazing people, we have Alex Shop joining us. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, how's it going, Joe?
Great to see you. We have a lot to talk about today. We have some spicy takes, so people definitely want to stick around. Before we get into, though, Alex, maybe a little more about yourself. We always love to know like how you met Alex Zapp and then how you got maybe into testing.
Oh, all right. So let me hit that first. How did I meet Alex? So a gazillion years ago, or it feels like a gazillion years ago, there were a set of software testing tools that really dominated the market, owned by a company called Mercury Interactive. Mercury was subsequently acquired by HP and Industry Evolves and whatever. And Alex Z and the Zapster, we'll call him the Zapster for today. So Alex Zapp and I both led partner firms that work very strategically with both Mercury and HP and a number of instantiations. Little bit of trivia. In those days when we were both highly engaged in that partner community, it wasn't unusual for people to email each of us, get our emails mixed up.
All right.
So every once in a while, we would end up going through our inboxes and forwarding it to each other. You know, it's a classic problem. Not a lot of people have a lot of Alexes in their contact list. So I think they just type in Alex and they think the machine's going to be smart enough to do whatever. And it just happens. So how did I get into testing? That is an excellent question, really. My bachelor's is in electrical engineering and minors in math and computer science. You know, you don't get much geekier than that. I did my master's work. So my bachelor's is real geeky. My master's work is in systems engineering. And with that kind of background, I ended up building a lot of systems, right? You start with smaller ones, you get to multi-billion-dollar projects, and testing was always very critical. And one of the hardest things to test to this day is software, right? So you're always looking for tools to make you more productive, make you more effective, make you more efficient, you know, all those kind of things, right? So it just happened. And when, you know, the Mercury tools came along, they were the dominant force, not only for functional testing, but also for performance testing. And a little bit of a plug in the 90s, late 90s, I was working with one of the world's largest telcos, helping them move from being a traditional telecommunications system to get into the data world. And one of the things we quickly discovered was that in that space, high volume transactions is tens of thousands per second, right? And what we ended up doing is what really impressed me around the Mercury tools I was just talking about was that they had the only tool out there that could handle large volumes. They couldn't handle that volume. So what we ended up doing is we put a pile of them in parallel, but it was the only way we could test. And then the functional testing tools that came along with it and different types of business components and all, you know, it just kind of happens when you're running a large scale system in a large scale project. You got to test this stuff before you roll it out. You don't want your users doing the testing.
Absolutely. And Alex, that's what I love about your product. It handles more than just functional testing. I believe it also does performance testing as well now. Is that correct?
Of course. I've been closely working in Mercury with performance with LoadRunner team.
Yep.
Some of the folks we have a long history together.
So a lot has changed. You mentioned consulting, certifications, being on the road. How much has AI changed this? Has AI changed these aspects of maybe what people associate with being into software as well?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer, most people have started using the letters AI starting in the fall of 2022. But the reality is AI as we know it today really started in the 1950s and it's been around for a real long time. I can admit I have gray hair and not much of it anymore. I worked my first AI use case in 1992.
Wow. Doing what?
I was with the intelligence community at the time, and we're working with what is still a use case we're still trying to solve today. Basically taking log files, from different sorts of events, different sources, and trying to correlate them and trying to create predictive analytics around where some incidents might happen. This was all around cybersecurity at the time. This wasn't on the like the pure intelligence side. I can say it now, but I couldn't say it then. NSA has two missions. They have an offensive mission and they have a defensive mission. I was on the defense side. And in 1980, when the ARPANET moved over to the Internet Protocol and created the Internet, a little bit of history there. NSA, in cooperation with private industry, set up a public-private partnership to look at security protocols and, how do you defend this thing, right? And out of it came SSL, TLSP.
Wow.
A lot of things that we use today, and they came out of that effort. And one of the efforts was, let's look at all this data and try to predict, bad behavior, or at least remove what isn't bad behavior so we have less analysis. And we're still struggling with that. But kind of back to your question, if you look at over time, taking it purely from the AI standpoint, AI has played an increasing role over the years, just not on the forefront of code generation, right? That's always been a big one. How do you automate code, right? And a lot of AI tools have been used by major vendors for quite some time, just not as big as it is now, but also code analysis, right? We have been struggling with really two things when you think about it, right? Somebody wants a microphone, a magic microphone that you can talk into and describe a system, and it generates the code. And somebody else wants to go through that code and make sure it's going to function properly, right? And then I guess you could say there's a third. You have your non-functional requirements like security. You want to make sure that there's no malicious code in there or any gotchas, especially on a mission critical system. And that just keeps on coming. But, now that ChatGPT became on everybody's lips in October of 2022, it's getting a lot more attention, which is really crafting an interesting problem. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff? How do you know what's real and what is snake oil?
How do you know? Because you do know, and you actually saw a demo. I was on a call with Zap, and you totally bought into it. Alex sometimes comes off as a showman. Hey, the greatest show on earth. And yet you know it AI, and you were totally bought in. I was kind of surprised.
Well, thank you. First and foremost, I do a lot of advising and consulting around AI governance. And I tell anybody that you talk to a vendor, they are required to use the letters AI within the first 30 to 45 seconds. It either affects their commission or they get fired or something because they all do it, right? So instantly ask them 3 questions. What can you do now that you couldn't do before AI? What can you do better now that you couldn't do before AI? And what are you going to do for me in the next 12, 18, 24 months? What's on your roadmap? 80% of the time, if they can answer that, there really is some AI within what they're doing. The other ones are like, I'm gonna. I was just told to say these letters. I'm being buzzword compliant, right? So you have to start digging into that. You also need to understand AI is not vanilla. Now, with that, there's not a taxonomy, a uniform recognized taxonomy. So you got to understand what kind of tools they're using and what the strengths and weaknesses are. For example, ChatGPT is known for crafting hallucinations and making up stuff, right? Okay, well, that's because it's a large language model, and large language models do that, right? There's also different types of trainings. There's supervised training, there's unsupervised training, right? So each of these algorithms have their own strengths and weaknesses. And by knowing what the algorithms are, what they do when they don't do, what their strengths and weaknesses are, you can detect that. The other thing, which a lot of free consulting here, what people don't realize is all the issues in AI. Okay, I'm not going to say all because there's some other ones that smaller percentage. The vast majority of the issues you deal with in AI is related to the data you use to train the model and how you trained it. So kind of ask the questions about how you got here, then ask the questions about how it was trained, where you got your training data, what's your process for updating as you find your gotchas. And by getting that, you start to understand who's really like thought about the problem and actually worked with it.